All right, listen up, all you future diplomats out there. Choosing international relations for your UPSC optional means you're not messing around, you're ready for a challenge.
You're diving into the deep end of global politics, history, philosophy, the whole shebang.
And let's be real, one thinker you absolutely can't avoid is John Stuart Mill.
Nope, can't escape him. Whether you're looking at democracies, economic policies, human rights, whatever it is, Mill's fingerprints are everywhere. UPSC examiners know this, which is why we're taking this deep dive.
Exactly. It's like your cheat sheet to get Mill's core ideas, the kind of stuff that'll make your UPSC answers shine.
And here's the thing, he was all about individual liberty, but also saw where government action was needed.
Oh, really?
Even kind of sort of flirted with, you guessed it, socialist ideas.
Wait, socialist? That's not what I expected. This guy sounds complicated.
That's the beauty of Mill, he makes you think critically. Even about something like democracy, which seems pretty straightforward, right?
Oh, yeah, I guess so.
He loved representative democracy, thought it was the best path to progress. But, and there's always a but, with Mill, he wasn't blind to its problems.
Okay, what problems? Now we're getting the good stuff, the
Like,
IR stuff.
Absolutely. Think about it. What happens when a majority vote leads to a decision that actually hurts a minority group?
Yeah, that's a problem.
Mill called that majority tyranny, a pretty central concept to understanding the whole challenge of democracy.
From a majority tyranny. Okay, got it. Definitely sounds like something the UPSC folks would love to ask about.
Definitely.
So how did Mill say we could, protect against this tyranny thing?
Well, he had a few ideas. First off, a strong system of individual rights, to protect minorities from whatever the majority might suddenly decide. Freedom of speech, assembly, religion, all that.
Makes sense.
But here's where it gets even juicier, especially for the UPSC.
Okay, lay it on me.
He was all for universal suffrage, everyone having the right to vote. But he thought it should be implemented gradually.
Gradually. But isn't the whole point of democracy that everyone gets an equal say?
Yeah, that's the simple version.
Okay. So what was Mill's version?
He suggested having, criteria for who could vote at first. Things like, get this, education level.
Oh.
And the ability to pay taxes. Bit controversial, to say the least.
Whoa, yeah. Tying voting rights to education or taxes. That's definitely not the one person, one vote idea I'm used to. What was his reasoning there?
His worry was that, an uninformed electorate or a bunch of voters who were, economically dependent could be easily swayed.
Oh, I see.
And end up making decisions that weren't good for them, or even the whole system. Remember, he was writing in the 19th century. Things were pretty turbulent back then.
Yeah, true. So much change happening.
So he was really thinking hard about how to make democracy actually work, in a world that was still figuring itself out.
So it's not about being elitist. It's more about making sure people are responsible, informed voters.
Yeah, exactly.
I see how that connects to, nation building and democratization, which is a big deal in IR. Things don't always go smoothly.
Exactly right. And this leads us to another one of Mill's big things, education.
Education.
He thought it was absolutely vital for a functioning democracy, the way to create responsible citizens who could participate in the political process.
That sounds familiar. Here in India, education's a big deal. It's even in our constitution, right? Is that Mill's influence, maybe?
Interesting question worth thinking about. Mill went so far as to say education should be state-controlled. Partly, he thought, to counter the influence of the church.
Whoa, state-controlled education. That's a pretty radical idea. And probably a topic that could spark a whole debate, even today.
For sure, for sure. Think about it. Individual freedom versus making sure everyone has access to quality education. That's not an easy question to answer.
Definitely not. It's complex, just like everything with Mill.
That's exactly what makes him so relevant for your UPSC prep. He doesn't give you the easy answers, he pushes you to think.
Okay, so we've got Mill, the democracy enthusiast, but he's also aware of the potential downsides and really believes in education. How does all this fit in with his views on the economy, especially for us IR folks? Because, let's be honest, politics and economics, they go hand in hand.
Absolutely, they're inseparable. And this is where Mill gets even more fascinating. He wasn't a strict hands-off kind of guy when it came to the economy.
Oh, so he wasn't all about free markets and individual economic freedom then?
Well, he believed in those things, but he wasn't totally laissez-faire, which was the popular idea at the time.
Wait, really? So he was kind of a rebel going against the flow?
He saw the limitations, especially when it came to things like poverty, inequality, exploitation. He actually identified what he called optional areas where government should intervene.
Optional areas. Okay, now I'm really curious. What situations did he think called for government action?
For example, Famine relief.
Famine relief.
He saw it as a moral duty for any government. Think about what that means for international aid today or humanitarian intervention.
Right, interesting.
He also thought worker protections were important, things like limiting work hours, improving conditions in factories, especially for kids.
I see. So even in a system that values freedom, there are times when the government needs to step in and protect people, especially the ones who are most vulnerable,
Right on. It's all about finding that balance.
between individual freedom and, I guess, like social responsibility.
Exactly.
That's actually pretty insightful. And it definitely makes you think about today's debates about globalization, inequality, and, the role of the state in the world.
It's all connected. And understanding those nuances in Mill's thinking is crucial for, well, for analyzing those debates.
Wow, this is gold. This is like a masterclass in how to think about global issues. Critical, nuanced, that's what the UPSC wants to see, right?
Exactly. And get this, Mill, the champion of liberty, was actually drawn to, get this, socialism.
Socialism? Are you serious?
It's true. One of the most surprising things about him. But before you picture him, waving the red flag, we need to be clear about what kind of socialism he was interested in. Welcome back to our deep dive into John Stuart Mill. Last time, we were talking about how this guy, so big on individual liberty, was actually kind of interested in socialism.
Yeah, that definitely left me hanging. It's like 1 minute you're all about freedom, then the next you're saying the government should control everything.
It does seem a little contradictory, doesn't it?
More than a little.
Yeah.
So what's the deal? How does that even work? We need to figure this out, especially if we want to tackle those UPSC questions.
Absolutely. And this is where understanding the historical context is key. Mill was writing during, a crazy time of social and economic upheaval. The Industrial Revolution was in full swing.
I think we're changing fast.
So he was seeing firsthand all these problems popping up. Poverty, inequality, workers being exploited,
Yeah.
all happening alongside this rise of capitalism.
So he wasn't just theorizing from some ivory tower. He was actually seeing these problems in the real world.
Exactly. And that's where his interest in socialism comes in. But, and it's a big but, he wasn't talking about the kind of state-controlled, planned economy that we usually think of when we hear socialism today.
Okay, so what kind of socialism did he have in mind? What was he drawn to?
Things like worker cooperatives.
Worker cooperatives.
They're profit sharing, systems where workers have more power, more of a stake in their workplaces.
No, it's not about getting rid of private property or having the government run everything. It's more like finding ways to make the system fairer, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Give everyone a piece of the pie, so to speak. And this actually goes back to his concern with individual liberty.
Okay, how so?
He was worried that if too much economic power ended up in the hands of a few, it would stifle creativity, innovation, ultimately squash individual freedom.
I can see that. If you're always struggling to survive, you don't have much time to think about personal growth or following your dreams.
Right. So for Mill, spreading out economic power wasn't just about being fair. It was about creating the conditions where individual liberty could thrive.
So we've got this guy who loves liberty, but also cares about economic justice, and is even open to some socialist ideas. It's a pretty wild mix, and I can already see how his ideas could apply to, a ton of issues in international relations.
Oh, absolutely. Think about debates on globalization, fair trade, worker rights, the role of big corporations.
Right, those are huge issues.
Mill's ideas give us a framework to understand those tensions between economic power, individual freedom, and how to build a just global order.
Wow, this is really starting to come together. But before we get too lost in the world of IR, let's circle back to something we touched on earlier, utilitarianism. It can be a tricky concept to wrap your head around, but it's super important for understanding Mill's whole ethical framework.
Absolutely. Utilitarianism is often misunderstood. It's not just about the ends justify the means, like some people think. It's more nuanced than that.
Okay, so break it down for us. What's the main idea, and how did it influence Mill?
At its core, utilitarianism says the morally right action is the one that creates the most happiness for the most people.
So it's about making the majority happy. Sounds kind of simple. But what about those who are left out? What about individual rights? Doesn't that get ignored?
Those are great questions, and they get to the heart of some of the criticisms of utilitarianism. But Mill was very aware of these concerns.
So how did he address those criticisms? How did he reconcile utilitarianism with his belief in individual liberty?
Well, he argued that In the long run, respecting individual liberty actually leads to greater happiness overall. A society where people can think freely, express themselves, live their lives the way they want, that kind of society is going to be more creative, innovative, adaptable. Ultimately, everyone benefits.
So it's not just about maximizing happiness right now, but also about creating a society that can thrive in the long run.
Exactly. But Mill also recognized that individual liberty has its own inherent value. It's something to be cherished and protected, even if it doesn't always lead to the most optimal outcome from a purely utilitarian perspective.
So there's this tension then between making the majority happy and protecting individual rights. How did Mill navigate that?
He argued that some individual rights are just so fundamental to human dignity that they should never be sacrificed, even if doing so might seem to create more happiness in the short term. He called this rights-based utilitarianism.
Rights-based utilitarianism. Okay, so he's acknowledging the importance of individual liberty while still aiming for the greatest good for the greatest number of people.
Exactly. It's not just about calculating happiness units, it's about recognizing the inherent worth of each person while still striving for a just and flourishing society.
That's a pretty nuanced take on utilitarianism, and I bet it's crucial for understanding how he approached a whole range of issues.
Absolutely. From economics to social reform to international relations. He believed that a truly just and prosperous society needs to be built on a foundation of individual liberty and social responsibility, where everyone's happiness is important, but so is the dignity of each person.
That's a tricky balance to achieve, but it's a challenge we're still facing today. It's all around us, from debates about human rights to discussions about how to make the world a better place.
And that's why Mill's ideas are so relevant for UPSC aspirants, especially those focusing on international relations.
It's like he's giving us a toolkit for thinking critically about the world, right?
Exactly. He helps us grapple with the complexities of global challenges, the tension between individual freedom and the well-being of the whole, and the ethical dilemmas that come up when we're trying to build a just and peaceful world.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're deep in the world of John Stuart Mill, and this guy is full of surprises, I gotta say. We've covered democracy, his surprising interest in socialism, even his nuanced take on utilitarianism.
It's like every time you think you've got him figured out, he throws a curveball.
Right. And speaking of curveballs, there's one more thing we need to talk about. Something pretty radical, especially for a thinker back in the 19th century.
Oh yeah, definitely ahead of his time on this one.
His passionate support for women's rights.
Now we're talking. This is where Mill really shines. Remember, we're talking Victorian England. Women were basically stuck in the domestic sphere. Hardly any legal or social rights.
It's hard to even imagine that now, especially with all the progress we've made on gender equality, well, at least in some parts of the world. But back then, these ideas were like revolutionary.
Big time. And Mill wasn't just talking the talk. He truly believed in full equality for women.
He put his money where his mouth was, huh?
Exactly. He even co-authored this groundbreaking essay with his wife, Harriet Taylor Mill, called The Subjection of Women.
The Subjection of Women, wow, even the title is powerful.
Right.
What were their main arguments? Why was women's equality so important to them?
They argued that denying women equal rights, it wasn't just unfair, it was actually holding society back.
Holding society back, how so?
They saw it as a huge waste of potential, stifling creativity, innovation, all of it.
So it's not just about fairness. It's about unleashing the potential of half the population.
Right.
That's a powerful argument, and it connects to so much: economic development, political stability, all central to international relations, really.
Exactly. Mill was connecting these ideas to his views on liberty and utilitarianism.
Right, we talked about those.
Denying women equal rights, to him, that was a violation of their individual freedom, and it stopped society from achieving the greatest happiness for everyone.
So it all ties together. His ideas about liberty, utilitarianism, even his openness to socialist ideas, it's all connected to his support for women's rights.
Yeah.
It wasn't just separate beliefs. He saw them all as part of the same picture.
That's what makes him such a fascinating thinker. His ideas are all woven together, and this commitment to social justice, it went beyond gender equality, too.
Oh, really? Tell me more.
He had some pretty progressive views on, well, what the government should do to help people.
Okay, this is where things get interesting. We've talked about how Mill wasn't a total free market guy. He saw a role for government in the economy, especially to help those in need. But how far did he go with this idea of government helping people?
He still believed in individual liberty, limited government, but he also thought the state had a responsibility to create conditions where everyone could thrive.
Create the right conditions. Okay, what does that mean?
Things like providing access to education, healthcare, even some kind of safety net for those who couldn't support themselves.
So he wasn't just protecting people from government overreach. He also saw a role for government in actively making society more just, more equal.
Exactly. He knew that inequalities could create these barriers, stop people from actually being free, from reaching their potential.
That sounds so relevant to today's world. Think about the fight against poverty, the debates about universal health care. These are all issues Mill was thinking about way back in the 19th century.
He gives us a framework for thinking about these complex challenges, balancing individual freedom with our responsibility to each other, and how to use the power of government to create a better world.
It's amazing how much his ideas still resonate today. You'd think he was writing for the 21st century, not the 19th.
That's the sign of a truly great thinker, someone whose ideas transcend time. And that's why we've taken this deep dive into John Stuart Mill.
It's been a wild ride, and I hope our listeners have enjoyed it as much as we have. We've covered so much, from democracy to the economy, individual liberty, social justice. It's a lot to take in, but remember, this is just the starting point.
There's so much more to explore in Mill's work. The more you dig into his writings, the more you'll uncover these layers of nuance and complexity. It'll challenge you, make you think in new ways.
So keep exploring, keep questioning, and most importantly, don't just passively absorb his ideas. Take them out into the real world. Apply them to the challenges we face today. Who knows, maybe you'll even impress those UPSC examiners along the way.
And if you found this deep dive helpful, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and give us a like. We're here to support you on your UPSC journey, one fascinating thinker at a time. Until next time, happy studying and best of luck on your exams.